So go ahead and get started. So welcome. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Taylor Heath. I go by Tay. I am the Vice President of the NHERI GSC. I'm really excited for our May monthly meeting. So as Rakesh was saying, the mini conference information is available at the QR code here. This is a QR code that links to the website at which you can find information on our keynote speaker, our program, and other information in regard to the conference. So please scan that QR code, check out the website. It's also been linked in the chat. And that way, if you are interested in attending or registering for the mini conference, you have all that information there. There is indeed still time to register. There is no deadline. We will allow same-day registration as long as it's the morning of. We're not going to be able to get links out throughout the entire day. So please try to register no later. No later than May 24th. That way, there's plenty of time to send out the calendar invite and get the Zoom link out to everyone. So please register by Wednesday, May 24th. Additionally, we'll be joined by our keynote speaker, Dr. Jennifer Irish from Virginia Tech University's Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. She'll be joining us to discuss career development and challenges and opportunities in coastal resilience and engineering. So it'll be a really exciting talk. If you have questions that you'd like to submit in advance, we do have a form for that. That will be posted in the chat soon. Otherwise, you can also feel free to email anyone on the organizing committee, myself, Rakesh, Jasmine, or Olani, and we'll be happy to collect that. And then we can also move to the next slide. So finally, this is the registration QR code. The conference will run from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Friday, May 26th. We have a slate of 3 amazing panel presentations, a poster session, and it'll also be where we will have the research challenge presentations shared. Again, the full program is on the website, and please register by May 24th in order to attend the conference. So a couple other brief opportunities that are coming up. We are working on our first NHERI GSC annual report. This is something that we are now going to be putting together every year that will present membership trends and demographics, how we are adhering to the mission of NHERI GSC through membership initiatives and events, potential individual member spotlights and successes. And really, because this is the first annual report, it's really your chance to shape what that report will look like. So in that vein, we have a few executive committee members who are already a part of this initiative, but we're really looking for non-executive committee members to join as well. We'd really love for this to be a collaborative effort that is joined by general members as well as executives. So we're looking for 2 to 3 folks to join our annual report writing group. It'll take place over the summer, primarily in June and July. So hopefully in a time that's a little bit lower stakes. So if you have that time, if you're interested in finding out more information or you're interested in joining that group, please reach out to me over email. My email's on the slide. It's also in the chat by Wednesday, May 24th. And I'll also be emailing everyone so that you all know that that opportunity is out there. And I think next, I'm going to turn it over briefly to Elliot to talk a bit about this really exciting opportunity working on an NSF proposal. Elliot, it's all you.
Thank you, Tay. For the first time since February or so, our proposal writing group met earlier this month in May. We were really just catching back up and reorganizing our thoughts on what we want our proposal to look like. For those of you who don't know, we are an unfunded group. NHERI GSC is unfunded, and we're trying to secure some funding for some opportunities for us. At the start, NHERI GSC is just a collection of multi-institutional, multidisciplinary natural hazards researchers. And essentially what we want to do is continue to foster that group and just give us more opportunities. And I know some collaborations have already been made in this group just unofficially. And we just kind of want to be given opportunities to formalize that and send each other to certain locations across the summer. So really what our proposal is after is creating an REU style program for graduate students for NHERI GSC to travel to different NHERI sites over the course of a month or 2 during the summer. So if you're interested in working on the proposal, looking at what the writing proposal looks like, or just curious about more details, please do shoot me a message. I just sent an email to the executive committee to see when we're going to meet next. It'll be the 2nd or 3rd week of June. and I'll send out an email for that to the entire NHERI GSC. So when we have that date formalized, anyone will be able to attend. It's not closed doors. You can come see what we're working on and get involved if you'd like. We were previously targeting innovations in graduate student education program, TBD on whether we'll continue to target that program. But please stop by when you see an email from me next week sometime for the official schedule. Would love to chat and bounce some ideas off of you. And right now, I think we have a group of 5 or 6 who was at the last meeting, and we'd love to bump those numbers up a little bit to get more help. But please stop by, chat. It doesn't have to be an official commitment. Just come by if you're interested. Thank you.
And I'll add a quick secondary plug that for anybody who is attending the NHERI Summer Institute, taking a look at this proposal in advance of that is a great way to sort of have something in mind as you're at the Summer Institute learning about proposal writing. So if you're going to be at the Summer Institute or interested in attending in a future year to learn about NSF proposal writing, this would be sort of a great way to dip your feet in, get involved in the process actively and early, and have something that you're kind of thinking about as you're learning the deeper, the nitty-gritty in that proposal writing.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in going into a faculty position and you say on your applications that you have experience writing NSF grants, particularly if you're going to the Summer Institute, this is a great thing to put on your resume and say, hey, I have experience.
It's all good things. Please get involved. It's going to be a great opportunity. Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, Narula, for all your hard work there.
Yeah, thank you, Tay.
So lastly, before we turn things over to our guest speaker, I'm going to be introducing very briefly the proposed changes to the NHERI GSC Constitution. So for anyone who may not be aware, the Executive Committee has been taking the last couple of months to work on some changes to the NHERI GSC Constitution that was ratified at the start of the organization. Some of these changes are purely administrative. They are correcting some spelling errors and really just making sure that things that are in the Constitution are aligned with the goals that we're actually interested in. But there are a few major changes. So the first set of those major changes is that now that we've had about a year, actually closer to a year and a half now to really grow, we've seen a lot of evolving of the executive committee positions, the work that's being done, and making sure, and some of which is not actually currently reflected in the Constitution. So one of the really big initiatives that we're trying to do right now is making sure that the actual work of the positions is being reflected in the Constitution. So aligning those two things. This will be really important, especially for anybody who's interested in running for a chair, vice chair, or officer position this coming, or I guess chair or officer position this coming August, or any time in the future, so that you have a really good sense of what you will be called on to do if you end up serving in that role. So once that is done, we will obviously be sharing that with everybody so that we have a really good sense of like what our officers are doing and also what they want to do in the future. There's a second set of changes as well that's also very large. So as many of you may know, our working groups as they stand now are reflected in the chairs and the vice chairs on the executive committee. These include research, workshop and mentoring, networking and community building, technology and communication, membership, I know I'm forgetting at least one, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Definitely can't forget that. And so these working groups have been incredibly useful. They meet once or twice a semester. They run phenomenal events. But really what's ended up happening is that most of the work that's being done is being done at the chair and vice chair level without really a ton of input from the working groups. They're just what we, when these were first put together, this was really kind of like a first pass at what we were thinking that the organizational structure might look like. And at the beginning, we had this emphasis as well on these more research-based groups. So regularly at the end of meetings, we would have groups based on wind engineering, on geotechnical engineering, reconnaissance, social science, simulation, et cetera. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to bring those back and formalize them. We'll also recognize that the working group structure as it is has not quite worked out. So what we have proposed that will be reflected in an upcoming draft of the NHERI GSC Constitution is that current working groups would have a chair and a vice chair that would work essentially as officers without working group members. This means that those working groups that have meetings regularly would no longer have those meetings, but that their functions would otherwise remain the same. So it's not really a huge functional change, just a big administrative change. In their place, we would be creating these new research-based working groups based on the topics that I've already said. These are topics that really reflect what NHERI is currently working on, and they would become spaces in which we can collaborate, have potential guest speakers that are more research-focused, and offer space to basically talk about innovations in those subfields. So these would be facilitated by a new batch of leadership positions that are essentially these research representatives who will be responsible for coordinating those working groups and would be under the chair and the vice chair of research. So that will be reflected in a proposed draft. You can flip to the next slide. In a proposed draft that will be available for public comment by NHERI GSC general members, all members, by Monday, June 5th. There will be a 2-week period for comments. So you can review it. We'll make sure to emphasize what the actual changes are, where things have been removed, edited, and added. And then following public comment, we'll take those comments into account, revise one final time, and then send it out for approval through a vote that will take place the week of June 19th through June 26th via Qualtrics. So in the interest of time, I'm going to say, if you have a question, please feel free to direct message me it or email me at the email that is in the chat. Otherwise, please be on the lookout for that. It is really important that we get as much feedback, as much insight as possible to make sure that this is really a structure that works for everyone, that really reflects the direction that all of us want NHERI GSC to go into. So with that, I'm going to stop talking about the Constitution. One last point, we have so much exciting stuff happening right now, is that we have the academic publishing workshop. Jack Baker from Stanford University will be leading our panel with 2 graduate students, Natalie Coleman, who's an NSF graduate research fellow at Texas A&M, and Amir, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Florida. They will be talking about academic publishing at a really excellent workshop that we've been planning and looking forward to for months. So please register for that, attend that, support our grad students who will be sharing a ton of insights at publishing at the graduate level. Yeah, we're really looking forward to that. Thank you, Jasmine, for putting that, and Nolani for putting that together. So without further ado, I will now introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Tracy Kijewski-Correa. I'm so honored to introduce her. She is a professor of engineering and global affairs at the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame, with a joint appointment as the chair and associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Earth Sciences at Notre Dame. This is going to be a long intro because there's just so many amazing achievements to highlight, all of which I could not fit in this introduction. She currently serves in a number of esteemed roles, including a co-director of the Integration Lab as part of the Master of Global William J. Pulte Director of the Keough School's Pulte Institute of Global Development, and as a fellow of the Keough School's Keough Institute for International Studies. Additionally, she is co-founder of Engineering to Empower, an initiative with the stated mission of empowering community resilience in the developing world, is on the faculty board of the Real Estate Institute, and is an affiliated faculty member for Notre Dame's Environmental Change Initiative. Her research focuses on disaster risk reduction and civil infrastructure challenges posed by increased urbanization and vulnerability. Her interdisciplinary scholarship, which is always very exciting, links science and technology to communities in the greatest need, delivering scalable paradigms to enhance the resilience and sustainability of civil infrastructure and inform the decisions of stakeholders, including homeowners, designers, planners, emergency managers, and policymakers. Her work includes the design and launch of a new platform of coastal risk assessment and geospatial decision support for the state of New Jersey called NJ Coast, the Green Resilience Project, and practitioner-facing integrated lifecycle analysis tools. A core faculty member in the NHERI Sim Center, she also serves as the inaugural director of the STEER Network, drawing on her experiences coordinating responses to the 2017 Atlantic hurricane season to assess the damage caused by major hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria. Dr. Kijewski-Correa joins us today to discuss a journal rejection triage system for natural hazards publications, a vital topic for graduate students, whether submitting your first or your fifth academic publication. Dr. Kijewski-Correa, I now turn things over to you.
All right, thank you so much. And so I'm actually going to be sharing some of the guidance we actually use in the integration lab. So the integration lab is a program at the University of Notre Dame that actually brings all the disciplines together and builds teams around important research questions that they want to solve together across disciplines. And so I run that lab, and that lab works with partner organizations all over the world to work on global challenges. So right now I'm prepping my team to go to Nigeria to look at resilience building in the areas where Boko Haram is currently active. So they work on some pretty thorny problems, but their goal is to actually gather data that can be used for evidence-based policymaking and publication. And so the slides I'm going to be using today are in part derived from the way that we coach those students to prepare their evidence base and to defend that evidence base. And I kind of tweaked it a little bit to encompass the kind of venues that we encounter in academic publishing, as our students usually in my program also have a dual publication thrust. They're going to be doing policy relevant publications in addition to usually cranking out a JPub at minimum from this 1-year experience in my integration lab. So with that kind of primer on the branding and the stylizing of the content you'll see here, the goal of today is to help you navigate reviewer feedback in a way that allows you to effectively learn from that process and become a better scholar. So a little bit of a roadmap. I will segment my comments into 4 parts or 4 phases. The first is helping you understand the importance of first knowing yourself and how you receive and respond to feedback. Talking first, then nextly about how we actually go on the offensive, because the best way to handle reviews is to actually stop the negative review in the first place. Then we'll look at how you plan the attack and then attack the plan when it comes time to actually receive those comments and triage them. And then some closing thoughts on how I think you can, and we all can, continue to grow in being more effective in receiving and responding to feedback. So first of all, this idea of kind of know thyself, what I really want to dive into here is understanding your own tendencies of how you receive feedback. So you can be kind to yourself, you can support yourself, and you can even understand the reactions you're having and how they may be fundamentally different from others. And that's because one of the things I always remind my students when they get their first round of feedback on this year-long endeavor they've been on, where they've been out in the field in some challenging places collecting data with communities that are significantly affected by disasters, they come back with a heavy responsibility to be the voice for those communities. And then they kind of prepare their recommendations and their evaluative reports, and they'll get feedback from the first time from global advisors and practitioners out in the sector. So for example, I work in the humanitarian response and disaster space. So people who are part of the UN shelter cluster, for example, would respond to their work and critique it. And sometimes that can be like a knife to the heart after you've spent so much time in the field and have put so much passion and responsibility in being the voice for a community. That can hit them hard. So I've seen students take feedback in a very kind of difficult or challenging light. I've seen it personally affect me, actually, and in receiving feedback, as I am really not good at receiving feedback. And reviews are one of the hardest things I tackle as an academic to this day. So I can really empathize with this first part about, first of all, just understanding where you come from and some of the unique differences we all have in how we respond to feedback. So one of the first things I did is the Harvard Business Review has done a number of studies on how people integrate feedback. And so while some of this research is not on academic feedback in the peer review process, it does highlight, and these are some of the best examples I could find, of some of the things that we need to remember when we contend with feedback. The first thing is that we think we're better than we are. Everybody produces a piece of work or builds their career thinking and hopefully having high levels of self-efficacy and self-esteem. And often when you submit a paper, you think it's great, you think the results are good. Sometimes you might be scared, so maybe I'm speaking too boldly, but at least with many of my colleagues, that paper goes in and they think that work is sound, and any reviewer to question it is a fool. And what they find is actually when you look at how others perceive you and perceive your work, you actually usually always score yourself higher than the rest of the world believes you are. Part of that is we might inflate our view. And part of that also comes from the fact that, over time, we truly do need to recalibrate ourselves. So always remember, when that feedback comes, a part of the reason it's a big blow to your ego or your psyche is because we always inflate the quality of our work. We always think what we've done is better than it truly is. And I'll explain the reasons why in my remarks today. But just know that that is one of the first reasons why peer review actually feels painful. It's because it's adjusting your expectations of where you think you are to where your peers and colleagues actually know you are. So you'll see that difference between the self-rating, the solid line, and the dash rating in this longitudinal study by the Harvard Business Review. Now, the second thing is it also varies by gender. And so that's another thing I want to highlight. I take feedback very differently than my male peers. And over time, I started to wonder why. And that is because there are differences in how the genders internalize feedback that are documented in psychology and rooted in even the biology and the way that our minds are wired. So what they find in this same Harvard Business Review study, where men are shown in blue here, women shown in red, self-ratings and solid lines dashed is the peer evaluation. You'll men have a higher impression of themselves or a higher esteem, if you will, than women. And that tends to be the case, and it holds up in the literature from early educational phases all the way through often into higher education. And what we also find is that women often take a stronger dip or hit as a result of peer feedback. It's a blow to us. Now, that can be good or bad. As these curves suggest, it sometimes allows a woman to calibrate faster to the peers' perspective of herself, right? So she's actually seeing like, oh, wow, I was really inflated in how good I thought I was. And I'm going to quickly adjust myself to approach my peers. So I'm going to recalibrate. One of the challenges, though, is that sometimes women take it actually to heart too much. This has been a problem with me, is that I might take a critique of my work as a direct critique of me and my efficacy as a scholar, my abilities and my talent. So they find that in this process of recalibration, women often question their abilities more than their male colleagues and might take that feedback as an important, again, recalibration, getting those dashed and solid lines to start approaching, hopefully, but might take it to heart too much where it has a damaging effect on one's self-esteem or self-efficacy and questioning their ability. So just know that you may see very different reactions across genders as feedback comes. You may talk to your co-authors who might be of a different gender and see that they're responding to the evaluation very differently than you are. So bring that sense of empathy and perspective as you kind of work with your colleagues, especially your co-authors, and working on feedback across gender lines. The other thing is that if you are somebody who has, and apologies that this is a little grainy, but if you are somebody that has challenges with confidence in general, you tend to be your own harshest critic. That's me, for example. And so I tend to always push myself harder, and set a higher and higher bar. And while I might be confident on the inside, I'm always having a little imposter syndrome. I feel that way even to this day at age 47. And so there is something to be said for personality type. The more confident an individual is, the more likely they are going to not only enjoy receiving feedback, they're actually going to seek negative feedback. They will want to be challenged and want to grow and want to know their limitations, because in their mind, it is going to be the way that they best learn and grow. And for a highly confident individual, they're okay to take that blow, if you will. But folks that score low in confidence, they avoid negative feedback. They actually don't want it at proportional, to rate, proportional to that confidence level. So know that you may also see within your research teams, and maybe even comparing yourself to advisor, varying levels of confidence, right? And so my advisor is a hyper confident individual, and he was always just like, oh, reviewers are idiots, and hand waving at the responses. And I was always like, oh, I can't even open this review. I would often sit on my reviews for a few days before looking at the comments. I might see the body of the email saying we have recommended revisions, major revisions, and I'd be like, oh, I can't even look at this. My advisor would dive in immediately, even if it meant like in the middle of a meeting, and already start waving hands and discrediting and saying, okay, so didn't mind negative feedback and even enjoy the challenge of fighting that feedback. So just know that all varies a lot on personality and confidence level.
Tracy, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Are you trying to share slides right now? Or
I've been sharing slides for a while. Yes, showing a lot of.
Oh, okay, we cannot see them.
Okay, I will try this again. Do I have share privilege? Okay,
there it is. You see it now. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I wish
sorry
I
about that.
No worries. Yeah, okay, let me backtrack then. Okay, so this is what I was showing at first. So let me recap. Solid line is self-rating, dashed line is peer rating. So my comments about we think we're better than we are, there's empirical evidence to suggest we evaluate ourselves higher than our peers do. And so eventually we recalibrate and start to approach their evaluation with continuous feedback, but we often think we're better than we are. The second visual I was showing showed the self-rating of men and women, solid lines, to the peer ratings of men and women, dashed lines, where men is blue, women are red. And the takeaway here is men tend to self-evaluate higher than women. Women tend to more quickly internalize and calibrate feedback to approach what their peers say. So they'll see a rapid dip, if you will, a fast dip once they receive feedback, sometimes taking it too hard. So that was the point I was making there. And more likely then to calibrate themselves to what the rest of the world thinks. Men may stay preferably higher and maintain that higher view of their work. So knowing that in the teams, and this was the confidence scale. The upper 10% of the world who was highly confident likes negative feedback. They enjoy the challenge. Those of us who score lower in confidence, we actually avoid it. We avoid opening the email. So knowing that about yourself, again, affects dramatically how you will approach and even the timing and way that you'll deal with feedback. And the next concept I was on before I realized my screen wasn't sharing properly was that it also takes time to thicken your skin to take feedback. So what we find is the older the individual, the more inclined they are to seek that feedback, which is why that confidence correlates with age. That's why your advisor may not mind opening up the comments and taking them on, because as you can see here, the dark boxes, the boomers, the older folks in their 50s, they don't mind taking a blow. Where younger generations, as we approach the 20s, we aren't as excited to receive negative feedback. And so there are a lot of challenges. We might even be avoiding giving feedback, which is also interesting. And we definitely aren't ready to receive it. So as a result, there's a lot of challenge around this idea of knowing where you are in your life cycle as a scholar and knowing how that's going to affect the way you deal with reviews. The other thing to keep in mind is your personality type will dramatically dictate how you receive feedback, especially when it's negative. And so all of these complex factors help to explain why your advisor may see the same review as you and have a completely different take than you do. I looked and kind of brought in the Myers-Briggs diagram here just to emphasize a couple of the common personality types you see in academia. So for example, the INFPs, these individuals who really like to bring teams together, they're called the healers. I'm mapped as that kind of person. We're very sensitive and we can't handle criticism. We are our own worst critic. We take ourselves apart all day long and question our abilities. So we are one of the personality types that can't handle feedback. Another type is supervisor. Think about your team leader, project manager style. They also actually, interestingly, can't take feedback. So while they're diametrically opposed in personality type, they're highly accomplished. They work their tails off to never be wrong and to always have their work right. And as a result, because they are overachievers, when they are criticized, they view it as I didn't get it right the first time, and they hit themselves hard and it frustrates them. So just know that your personality type, your gender, your age, all of these things are going to come together to basically shape the way you deal with feedback. So you need to understand it about yourself. You need to allow yourself the space, time, and process to handle feedback in a way that's most constructive. I can tell you a horror story from my PhD. My advisor opened a review, saw the comments, hit a reply when he meant to hit a forward, and called the chief editor an a-hole. And that went to the editor-in-chief of one of the most prestigious journals. And he meant to forward it to me and say, like, look at this a-hole. And, he just said that, he's going to desk reject this or what. I forgot what happened. He was really mad. And it went to the reviewer. We did not. Went to the editor. It did not, of course, make it to that journal that we'd worked a year to get the article into. Showing you that you need to understand how you react. And if that means you close it and don't touch it for 24 hours until you could be in a cooler headspace, then you need to. He was an ESTJ personality type. So that criticism fired him up, and we honestly had a very bad situation that day. So, again, thinking about how you take feedback and knowing how to therefore bring it into your process is key. All right, so now that you understand why feedback from reviewers is such a variable thing, and a variable experience for us all, now let me take you through how you handle it. Okay, My first statement is offense is the best defense. And I think the problem is the best way to head off bad reviews and deal with them is to never get bad reviews in the first place. So what I wanted to emphasize are some of the techniques that actually can help you write a better paper at the outset to avoid you having to deal with possibly multiple review cycles at, the back end. So one of the things that I actually think we don't do well in training our graduate students is actually how to build their papers. A lot of people just dive in and start writing. And in my opinion, that is not the way to attack it. Because if you do that, you're going to be writing what you think should be written, not what your audience actually demands, and most likely not the right thing. And that's because we have our own impressions about the knowledge that we want to share. And that's actually biased, as you're going to see a few slides from now, by our own perceptions. So in the integration lab, we train students to actually use a nested model to build out their written products. We start with the core. You don't write a thing until you build the outline, and that in academic publishing is somewhat easy because each journal has its own specifications of the sections that you need to include, the order and the word count. So you already can get that mapped out from day one, and that should be step one. The second step then is we actually don't let them write a single complete sentence until they can outline the key points they need to hit in every section of the required elements of the journal. And so you shouldn't be writing until you can see the logic and flow of the paper by bulleting out what each section and the key points you want to make here and the key arguments you need to, express. I don't want to see your results. I don't want to see your evidence yet. I don't want to see the literature review. I want to see what the key things you are going to hit and how you're going to organize it. That ensures flow. And flow is usually one of the reasons your paper gets rejected or negatively reviewed is because it doesn't make sense. So stopping and outlining and bulleting avoids you writing a paper or putting a lot of effort into writing before you know what you're going to say and in what order. Then in the third step, you start mapping the evidence to that outline. So the first place a lot of people might start depends on your mindset. When I work with social sciences, it's always the literature review first. They start by building that. Often in engineering, people already know where their novelty is, so they start with the results and work backwards. Doesn't matter. Either way, map the evidence base. It's going to require two things, a literature review, and then obviously your results showing the efficacy of whatever you are proposing, right? Then you start writing and moving it into a narrative and getting it to flow and weaving the sentences together. But that's like the last step after you know what you need to do, know what you want to say, organize your evidence properly, then you dive in and actually stitch it together. So we do this kind of skeleton, put the meat on it, then finally put the skin on it. We build from the inside out when we do our writing in the lab. As part of that process, I also don't let my students write until they know two things. First of all, who is the audience? You should find an exemplar paper from the journal you're targeting that you can use as a model for your paper. You should read that paper and understand the tone, the style, the terminology, the depth of the examples and evidence, the depth and the extent of the literature review. That's an example of what made it through review in that journal. You want to make sure you're honoring that. Second, anybody that you're citing in your paper is going to be a possible reviewer. So if you are not able to understand how your assumptions or claims compare to what those people did in their papers, and obviously you're usually making that case in your literature review, that's going to be where they take you apart in the reviews. So if you can anticipate that I'm citing Professor Smith, and Professor Smith is known for this particular method, if I don't make a clear argument why that method wouldn't be applicable here, or how this method that I'm proposing is superior, they're going to probably take me out. So you can already be doing your intel, if you will, just like you're, a spy. You can already get ready for the review by knowing who's most likely going to be your reviewer, because they're often drawn from your references. So that's how we kind of start that. Now, the other problem with writing is that you, as an author of research that you have uniquely led, have a problem, and it's called the curse of knowledge. If you've never heard of this phrase, the curse of knowledge, is quite interesting. The book Made to Stick is basically about how you get your message into the world and get people to hear what you have to say and remember it. We don't really teach, again, young engineers and young scholars how to do this, but if you go into the worlds of policymakers, this is what we teach all day. How do you get your message out there? And one of the things they explain, which I think is something we all struggle with, is what they call the curse of knowledge. Once you know your subject matter so well, right? So once you know something, the direct quote from the book, you find it hard to imagine what it was like to not know it. Your readers don't know what you know. Some of them may have expertise in your area, but they still don't know what you know. They don't know how you arrived at the theories you did, what went into the simulation you ran or the setup for the experiment. They do not know. You know, so you miss. You have blind spots about what you need to explain and justify because it all makes perfect sense to you. You've been working on it for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You're cursed by how much knowledge you have. And so as a result, it becomes hard for you to relate to your audience or your reader who doesn't know what you know. And therefore, you perpetually make these blind spots in your writing. And that's usually what reviewers attack. They attack the lack of details, the lack of justification, the lack of, argument or logic for what you're doing because you carry the curse of knowledge. So this book kind of teaches you how to make sure you don't make that mistake. And they actually break it down into a 5-point formula they call success. And I find this is a really interesting way to audit yourself to make sure you're writing well and that you're not falling into this curse. Now, what you're going to note is the orbits that I use, the concentric circles, they're founded on this. We start with the core. If you don't know the core message that each section of your paper needs to communicate, and you don't know that before you put a single complete sentence together, you've already failed, right? So you first need to know what you're putting there. And you need to get it communicated concisely. In the book, they say that sometimes we over-explain, and as a result, make it so heavy that the reader can't even find the message. So your core messages have to stand out. They have to be repeated, and they have to be so clear that there is not a lot of extra fat around them. Where will you add your fat, your details? In justification. But the core message of each part of your paper needs to stand out. It needs to be clear, right? The number one core message most papers are missing is what is the novel contribution of this work? To the point that I've often made a statement to that effect in my first, section, my introduction. At the very end, I have that roadmap. So this study contributes by, I literally write it out now. I don't count on the reader to parse it out of the very complicated argument I'm making in the introduction. I literally get that core message out. Here's what we're doing. And then I hit it over and over with core messages that echo it throughout. So simplicity is key when it comes to getting your key contribution out there for the reader to find. The second is that no reader will be impressed by your work if it's not unexpected. That's the second letter of success. What does unexpected mean? It means novel. So it has to have two things in there. It has to have surprise and interest. If you write about something that nobody cares about, they will not find it novel, actually. So even the most boring subject must be made interesting and justified as a compelling problem for a reader, even within the field, to be interested. And the second, it must surprise them. It must teach them something they don't know before. If you can't do those two things, you actually shouldn't write a paper. Because if your paper doesn't surprise them with something they've never seen before, and it doesn't interest them that this is something the world needs, then frankly, you shouldn't be doing it. So that, really forces me to pull that out and make that my core message. What is surprising and interesting about this research and why you should care? The next is concreteness, which in engineering is a little bit easier, but you want to step away, and once you know your core message and what's unexpected and interesting about it, you need to then figure out what examples or application or case study could I pick that is going to help illustrate that most profoundly. You probably have many results, especially if you're writing a dissertation. It's about picking the ones and then package them in a way that they illustrate your point. So it's not abstract, it's highly tangible. And visuals are such a key part of the concreteness formula for having your paper resonate. If you have not worked on your visual communication skills, check out the book called Back of the Napkin. It teaches you how to visually communicate. If you have a complex algorithm, a complex analysis, theory, or framework, make a visual to capture it as the anchor, figure one, in the paper, so that the reader has a roadmap, the reviewer has a roadmap that they can visually look at, because 95% of our learning comes visually. And for half the population, that's their preferred model for learning. So the visuals you choose to create concreteness are going to make sure that 1 out of every 2 reviewers who is highly visual can anchor the work and understand what you're saying. Credibility part is easy. That comes from the robust literature review. But the 2 things that I will add to that to help you avoid a bad review is, number 1, make sure you know the established ways in your field that results are presented, benchmarked, verified, and validated. Make sure you're using those. Because if you're not reporting things in the way the field does, even if those results are great, they're going to be challenged. Third, make sure you have your robustness checks ready as you are writing. Supplemental materials are a growing way to get ahead of a reviewer. So what I'm doing when I'm writing is I've only got room, let's say, for 2 examples. Those other 4 examples that prove my subtle points, I already have them packaged in a supplemental material, because I know reviewer number 3 is going to come and say, well, how do you know it holds when you change this variable? Here you go. So rather than scrambling to do that when the review comes, if I have extra examples I haven't used in the paper, I'm already building up a supplemental material and having it on standby so I can quickly pivot the response to reviewers and have that material ready. And the last thing is, this part feels weird for engineers. The last part of success, this acronym, is they say you have to get a reader's emotion to fight for your work. And if you get a reviewer mad, they won't give you a favorable review. If you land in a particular way that excites them and they connect with, you're going to get a positive review. So believe it or not, as objective as you think peer review is, there are emotions tied to it because there's humans doing it. So they say, think about this, for example. Try to pick examples and problems that you know appeal to where your sector's going, where your field is pushing next, the ideas that are exciting people. The more you can package or connect them, the better. An example, when I work in life cycle assessments, I often point to SE 2050. If you haven't heard about this, this is our sector-wide commitment in structural engineering to go, carbon neutral by 2050. So again, by connecting my work and saying, I'm going to help us get to this big aspirational goal, I try to, again, create interest, but also get readers who identify with that, get excited by that possibility that my work is going to get us to this big goal someday. I get them energized about my work. And so again, while emotion is not always something we can play in engineering writing, it actually has a space, particularly when you present your work. There's opportunities to do that. All right, so now you did all this stuff I advised you, and you get a crap review back. How do you handle it? Well, I want to just talk about how you handle reviews in general, because I think that if you do some of the things I talked about in part 2, the odds of getting a bad review are going to diminish anyway. But let me take you through usually how reviews fall out and what has really gone wrong. First thing is, often you just make a mistake in complying with the author guidelines. So compliance things are usually the first level of issue that you run into in a review, and those are easy to fix. Simplicity is the second thing that we hear people complain about. They say that the paper isn't well organized. It doesn't flow or have a logic, and it kind of rambles, and basically the reader got lost. Well, how do you stop that? You go back to what I said. You outline and get your core messages bulleted out, and then you write. That's going to head off that issue. The third one, credibility. Did you not have enough evidence to support your claims, particularly from the literature? As a result, that one can also be addressed by the third point in my concentric circles, mapping your evidence once you know the core messages you're trying to communicate. So again, this one is usually addressed if you do the things I mentioned in part 2. Specificity. Did you pick good examples to illustrate the core things that you're trying to demonstrate about your work, the salient points? Again, if you did what we suggest in that mapping process, you would hopefully have picked visuals that really jump out and examples that really jump out and concretely communicate the points you're trying to make. And then cohesion is the last one. For many writers, they might do all these things right. Great examples, very clear claims rooted in the evidence base of the literature, simple, clear, well-articulated contribution to the field, checked all the boxes on the author guidelines, but they didn't integrate well. They started contradicting themselves by mixing terminology, mixing notation, becoming disconnected or even redundant. And those things really tick off a reviewer and give the impression you didn't focus on the work. In fact, I even saw one paper where the author was actually talking about a different subject in like section 5 than the paper was about, making it clear that they just cut and paste narrative language from other papers and then just change the figure numbers and a few key words. These are moments where you can see the writing is disconnected. And the only way to address cohesion is to allow yourself time for good copy editing, putting the paper away and reviewing it with fresh eyes a week after you finished your major writing. So cohesion issues usually come up when you didn't have the ability to carefully copy edit and really check that everything was pulled together. So these are the classes of feedback we often see. But then you have this issue of now knowing, how do I address the feedback? And how do I make a response to the reviewer that is humble and appreciative and constructive? Because my goodness, sometimes those comments can get overwhelming. What I often do in my process is we will triage the reviewer comments, and I'll show you the template that I use for this process. We basically group them into 4 different categories, and they relate to level of effort and the direct pathway, if you will, to resolving them. The first category, which we might even color code in ours as like green because it's so easy, is like the obvious. Some reviewers will just pick on you for grammar and propose direct edits and point out your misspellings, and those are super easy. So those we're going to shade in green because they're obvious. They're like, oh gosh, how did I miss that? Great. So those are the ones where you thank that reviewer. Sorry, we will copy edit more carefully, and we're out. The second class that I'll touch on is on the far right, the ones we call the beneficial. These are the ones where that reviewer has really pointed out where the paper could be better restructured or reorganized. It might require an overhaul, meaning you got to move sections around. I had a data model paper that had to be completely rebuilt. And it frustrated me in the first round of reviews until I saw that, wow, curse of knowledge, they couldn't follow the logic as I do. And that led me to reorganize or restructure the paper, clarify the terminology that we were using, and even add some additional literature to help it. And so I find those beneficial comments. Those are going to take a little more time because they involve major restructuring, but in the end, they make the paper better. So we'll look at comments, we'll say, okay, what are the obvious ones? We'll shade those in green. We can knock those out easily. What are the beneficial ones? They're going to take more work, but this is work we want to do because it's going to make the paper better. So we're going to commit to do that. The next 2, the one in the middle, the misdirected and the puzzling, require a little more sophistication. The misdirected really comes down to a reader, reviewer, not paying attention. So these require politically delicate responses. Usually they'll say things like, well, the authors failed to, cite this literature or failed to check X. And you checked that, it's in section 2.1. So there's a very delicate way of redirecting. What I often do when I'm writing the responses for this kind of comment is I'll say things like, apologies if we didn't make that clear. As you can see in section 2.1, we did do that robustness check, and we have, clarified the language further to make that more apparent for the reader. So you're kind of humbly apologizing, but also subtly showing them, hey man, I had that in there. And it's a way to kind of check that without being overly insulting. But then the last one are the ones we call the puzzling. We'll shade these in red. These are ones we don't know what to do with. They're comments that are too vague. So as a result, they're not linked to any actionable thing that we can do. They might be contradictory or totally confusing. They might even seem like they're disconnected from like what we're working on. And so as a result, you're scratching your head wondering like, what the heck is this? In those, you can have 2 pathways. You can firstly decide right away in the initial triaging to send an email to the associate editor and say, we're looking at the comment from reviewer number 2, and you give them the comment, we're not sure how to act upon it. Do you have any guidance? Or could we seek additional clarification from the reviewer? If instead you think it's something that they just don't understand what you're doing, or they seem to be misfiring, then you could probably diplomatically just address it in your response and not act. But sometimes it does warrant an early email. You must do it early to have time for the response and then to respond to that. You might want to send an email to the associate editor. We had one where a reviewer said they marked up the paper, the document, but we never found that in the system. So again, that was one of the first emails we sent when we triaged. We said, can we find out where that paper is? We received it about a week later, and we were able to act on it within the allocated time for the re-review process, which, they usually give you a time window. So we always triage our feedback to make an action plan. So we know which ones will take more time, which ones will be easier to knock out, which ones require a follow-up email to the editor, and which ones we just need a politically savvy response to move our way through. And then we launch our process as a team. So I have 5 steps I take when I'm launching the process. I'm usually the lead author, so I'm responsible for the process. The first is I set up our file environment. I have a template for the response to reviewers. I begin copying, pasting their responses and numbering them into a numbering system by comment ID number. I create copies of all the relevant files that we're going to be updating, create it all. I use Google folders. I create all that, all the, team gets that. And I create a timeline by which we're going to have this done, dictated by the journal's timeline. Then we do that second step of triaging. As I said, we're going to look at all the, comments. We're going to see how difficult they are, how long they'll take. We are going to make a preliminary strategy, just quick notes for each one about how we're going to attack it, if we will at all. Then we will assign them to different co-authors and delegate who will take each comment. And as I said, if we need clarification from the editor because of a vague comment, we will send that email at step 2. At step 3, we start attacking. And we attack in either one of 2 ways, depends on your personality type. If you need quick wins, take path number 1. Go to the low-hanging fruits and build momentum by knocking out the simplest things. The direct grammar mistakes, the spelling mistakes, build your confidence. If you're like me and time is critical to you, you may start on path 2, taking the things that'll take more time because you're nervous about having enough time to do those extra runs or get that extra literature review done or do that restructuring. So I usually do start path 2 because I know it's going to take more time and I want to get on that early. Depends on your personality and if you need quick wins or more time because you're anxious like me. Then it's just about sustaining the action. What we do as a team, we have 2 tips that really help us. Number 1, we have a system of updating our response to reviewers to show progress. So eventually our color coding starts to highlight which comments still need to be addressed and which ones are done. We might shade those gray or green when they're satisfied, red when we're still concerned about them. We will, as we're making edits in the manuscript, drop a comment to cross-reference the reviewer comment. So I might say, like, I edit a section and then I put a comment saying this is in response to reviewer 2's comment number 3. And that way I can map in my paper that I've gotten all the comments addressed and compare that to make sure everyone is going to be satisfied. And then as I'm doing the editing in the manuscript, I always craft my response to reviewers in parallel so I can remember what I'm doing in the manuscript and capture that concisely in my written response to them. And then at the end, you're going to review your final responses, really careful with your tone. Pick your battles on where you want to push back. Have humility in how you accept their feedback and reply to their feedback. I go back and re-verify that all my line numbers are appropriate so that if my response to reviewer says we have updated line 42, I double check that line 42 is where that occurs because sometimes as you're writing things shift. And then I have time in my schedule for all my co-authors to review both the responses and the marked up manuscript, and then we push it out the door. Here's how our templates look, just so you can see. We build a grid. Every reviewer gets a numbering system. R2 means reviewer 2. 0 is used for just their opening comments, usually things like, we really enjoyed this paper. It's a great contribution. I might then reply, thank you for that. And then their first hard critique becomes R2.1. 2.2, 2.3, and then each of these gets a corresponding response. When we're triaging, our responses are short. They're just basically our initial assessment of how we're going to attack it. You can see that shown in blue here. Then over time, those build out and have delegation assigned. The ones that we're worried about and take the most time will be shaded in red so the team knows that this is the one we're worried about. And as we continue to build them up, you can see the length and the polish on the responses continues to improve. By the time we're here to the responses on the right, this is about ready to go out the door. So it really is an evolution from a blank canvas where I map all of the reviewer feedback to that initial triage with our strategy, eventually to a set of delegated and prioritized actions, and then finally to the response. So with that, I will close with just a few tips on, how this system is working for me, but more importantly, how you can keep growing. I think one of the best things you can do as a young scholar is ask your advisor or mentors to show you their worst paper, the one that got the hardest review. Ask if you can see their response to reviewers. So you can see the comments the reviewers raised and how your advisor or mentor handled that. They may not want to show you their worst work, but if you can see their worst, it will help you get to your best. Second, continue to critique the writing of others. You already do this actively in your research, but if you can shadow review, meaning like your advisor is reviewing, they let you review to get practice. If you can do peer-to-peer editing where you swap papers with a colleague and provide feedback. If you can do mock reviews, just when you're reading literature, pretend you're reviewing it and just give yourself practice critiquing. The more you get in the head of a reviewer yourself, and it's a good skill to have professionally, the more you'll be ready to handle reviews when they come to you. I also encourage my students to create a pro-con grid when they're setting up their approach and why it's better or why their contribution is important. Remember, again, the people you're citing are probably going to be among the reviewers of your paper. You should be able to lay out the pros and cons of the methodologies that are out there that they perhaps are propagating and promoting, and be able to show how yours compares and be able to argue how yours provides a pro that offsets one of their cons, or a bigger pro that outweighs, their smaller pro, or a con that, offsets the bigger con that they have. You're going to win positive or negative, but know how you're winning, because that's the argument you need to make in the beginning of your paper. And that's the argument you're going to need when those reviews come back. As you're doing your research, also keep a list of your biggest assumptions, known limitations, and concerns. Basically, all the things that scare you and we often avoid. Keep running notes on them and practice arguing your way through them. First of all, if you don't have a good argument for those assumptions and justifications for those limitations, your paper probably isn't ready for publishing anyway. And that argument should be in your paper. And then secondly, those again are going to be some of the things reviewers will come back to when you publish. So again, having those arguments well crafted in your paper, in your notes, and in your mind means you're going to be more nimble in responding. And the last one, practice gratitude framing. I know that this is a hard thing to do, but if you are more grateful for all things in your life, including criticism, then you would realize that someone took the time to read my work and give me an hour or more of their day to help me be a better scholar. And if we could see it in that light, it's an incredibly generous act and a chance to help you grow at the hands of a complete stranger. Even my most adamant colleagues who don't like feedback and swear that they are the best thing since sliced bread, after painful slamming and pounding and sending even a bad email with a bad word, they often always turn at the end of the process and say, my paper was better because I was forced to do this and it made for a better paper. And in the end, they're actually thankful for it. They just don't see it till 6 weeks later when the review is complete, the paper gets accepted and they see the value. If you frame with gratitude the moment that email hits the inbox with those comments, you're going to have a better mindset through those 6 weeks than the colleague who's fighting it and then thankful at the end. So I think that can really help you move through it, especially when the feedback is not the best. So those are just my thoughts and how we train in the lab to handle this. And hopefully that was helpful to all of you.
Thank you so much. That was I'll just say, for me, phenomenally helpful presentation. I know that we're past time, but I don't know if Tracy, if you can stick around, if maybe there are a couple of questions that folks have, you can feel free to post them in the chat. Feel free to speak up, or I'll monitor the participants in case someone feels inclined to put up their hand.
Yes, feel free if you have any questions. And there was a question asking, will this presentation be shared? I'm very happy to download it and send it over to you guys. It's a Google slide deck that I can export it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, any questions that anybody has?
I have one.
Yeah.
So I guess working in, my research focuses in the wind aspect of structural performance, and one of the papers that my first experience submitting a paper was working with publishing our data set. I work with David Roosh. I'm sure you know him. Actually, you're co-author on the paper, so you probably saw the review as well.
Yeah.
So I want to hear your perspective on it, and the fact that we were submitting this paper on this data set that had anomalies in performance, and the reviewer came back with some pretty aggressive comments, just stating that these fragility functions of empirical data needed to be thrown out because of the anomalies and the unexpected trends that we were seeing. But from a researcher's perspective, like from our perspective, this is something that we need to figure out why. But we didn't at that point have a good, that was not the purpose of that paper. And so I guess just hearing your perspective on how to come back from that area, because I don't feel like that's something that's going to we're going to go away from. We're going to constantly see these differences in performance as we try to understand structural performance in windstorms.
Yeah. So to anchor that, and even to bring it more broadly to other hazards and other fields, essentially what you see is a conundrum that in situ observations in the field, in the quote real world, right, our actual built and natural environment, are going to be dramatically different from what we can create in an experiment or computationally simulate. And so as a result, we have been trained disciplinarily, usually to engage one of those methods in pseudo isolation. I do field work and I do all of this empirical evidence based on the field. Or I run computational simulations and I rarely have the chance to validate that against these other, experimental or in situ observations. Or an experimentalist may not build a computational model. What we've seen is as a result, you get in these silos that oh, this doesn't connect, or this is the way we've always done it, so therefore this can't be right. So a couple of the things that I try to highlight as a champion, especially for in situ observation, there is no laboratory, there's no model that captures what the real world actually does. And because of that, we have to have an open spirit of curiosity to see what the world will teach us. Some of the things we know, for example, about this is that the idea here that we continue to see our infrastructure, our communities not perform the way we expect. And that's due to two causes. Either one, we're not simulating or understanding the phenomenon at the outset and then designing and building things appropriately for those, which means we have a gap in knowledge that real world has now shown. Or two, we have a gap in adoption and uptake at the human and policy level. That means humans are not adopting and following what we've said. Both of those could be in play, Jordan, in what you're seeing. So often I try to remind people that the best laboratory in the world is nature's laboratory. And when nature is yelling at us that something does not compute, it is not about whether the thing that's valid or invalid. In fact, you can make an argument about why we believe this is the best possible, and there are no ideal conditions, right? The best possible data we can get today. And that's true of any experiment and any simulation, right? Nothing's perfect. But it's yelling at a gap. And I believe in situ observations highlight gaps in our understanding. And that's why we're trying to now force greater convergence between experiments, models, and field observations, so that they're in a generative cycle that when you see a gap in field observations, you are either feeding it ideally to an experiment that tries to recreate in controlled settings and find out, well, what's going on here? Why are we seeing something we've never seen before? And then once we have that understanding in a controlled experiment, calibrate a computational model to then extend that and look at how that would affect a community or under different scenarios. I don't think you can solve any real problem without mirroring those. But you will run into reviewers who are narrowly trained in one of those silos and believe that silo is God. And to be honest with you, if I was ever going to fight, my whole career has been in situ, I will fight for in situ every day. I learn more about human behavior by seeing what they do in the real world, but infrastructure by seeing, what you do in the real world. And so that's how I usually argue for it. And it makes people uncomfortable because it's messy, it's uncontrolled, but it's the most authentic laboratory we have. I know that doesn't make it feel better, but it is foreign to a lot of people to imagine a world where that's going to guide us.
Agreed. Thank you.
We have a question in the chat from Richard. Is it common to ask for a time extension to the editor? I've not had to ask for one, but I've come close.
Yeah, it is, you feel really powerless in the editing process. That's how I feel. So I really try not to, but what I do is if I think I try to be honest in that first step of laying out the timeline. And if we don't think we're going to make it, maybe because there's a big substantive restructure, I will ask for it up front. especially if they give me 30 days. I have one journal that gives me 30 days, and it hit at a time when I had two other, I had two other R&Rs, as we call them, revise and resubmits, on my desk. There was no way I was going to do a third in 4 weeks. So I did it straight up. So I guess, Richard, my goal is I try to avoid it. But if I am smart and honest with myself, right? And we all know that sometimes, like, oh, I can get it done, and you're overly optimistic. There's any fear that you can't clear the plate, or this is coming when you have heavy TA duties or your qualifiers, whatever it is, ask for it right away. And it doesn't hurt to ask, and you'll often find they can be generous. But the reason I won't ask for it up front if I don't have to is because the cycles take so darn long. I don't know if you've had that experience. Like, I've had papers that take 2 years to get through. So I'm really trying to keep it alive on the editor's, radar. And if it's a re-review, those reviewers, you want to catch them while they're still willing to engage the paper and not sit on it. So I try to stay on the cycles to avoid getting stuck in a delayed queue. But if I can't make it, I'm honest up front. So honesty, best policy.
Thank you so much. How about Rami, would you like to be our last question? I know we're approaching the 15 minutes past, and I want to be, respectful of everybody's time. I know we have to run to another meeting in a few minutes, but Rami, why don't you close us off with your last question?
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Rami Moruf Olalikon from Nigeria. I want to say thank you for the presentation, but I have some few concerns, which almost in your last statement, you almost dive into it. One, sometimes publishing some papers, it could take more than a year, and for me, I am an environmentalist, and you submit a paper to a journal, even haven't read their scope and the rest of them, and the paper goes through the cycle. And at the end of almost more than a year, then they came up with a review comments looking at the engineering part of pollution, which is a little bit outside my own field as an environmentalist, which I am not an environmental engineer per se. And when I read through the various review comments, I got lost in the sense that most of the comments are squarely based on engineering part of pollution, which is outside the scope of what I've actually written. And it has taken more than a year. Please, how do I go about addressing such issues?
Yes. So this is someplace where your advisor needs to be active. If you have received a reviewer that is not with the appropriate expertise or has provided a review that's completely misaligned with your subject matter, I usually raise that to the associate editor. I will not engage somebody who doesn't provide a constructive review. I've also done this when I've had reviewers just be hostile. They don't provide any constructive feedback. They just, attack the work. And I have taken that to the associate editor and flagged it. Sometimes the associate editors don't realize what the review actually says. They don't take the time to read it. But this is something, as a graduate student, politically you're not probably ready to engage, because it can be sometimes an uncomfortable conversation to basically tell an associate editor they're not doing their job. But in our community, we've recently had a couple associate editors dismissed from their positions for not handling review processes efficiently or properly. So we do have an obligation when we see this to actually alert the associate editor. If they fail to take action, we have gone to the editor-in-chief and actually pointed this out. We've also done this when reviews have been stuck for a year or more. That's completely unacceptable. But again, that's something you want your advisor to fight, because you as a junior colleague shouldn't have to fight that battle yet.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to everybody who asked a question. I did post Dr. Kijewski-Correa's email in the chat. If perhaps you may want to get in touch at a later point, and this will be posted, the slides as well as the recording, on the website once it's able to be processed and uploaded. So please be on the lookout for that. Thank you so much to our guest speaker. Can I get a final round of virtual or real applause for this amazing talk? I found this super helpful. I'm going to just take this and sit with it for a while. So thank you all
so much.
so much.
Yeah. Take care.
Just as some final parting words to everyone, we do have our we have a large slate of things coming up. Mini conference on Friday, May 26th. That's next week. Please register by the 24th. We have the publishing workshop on June 9th. We have our general meeting on June 16th, which will be our NHERI GSC social and our last meeting until August. So please join us for that. And with that, I have no further announcements or things to say. Register for things, join us for things. And again, thank you so much, Tracy, for this incredible presentation.